The Clear Linux operating system is highly optimized to run on Intel hardware. It makes sense since Intel is one of the primary developers of Clear Linux. So it comes highly tuned out of the box for Intel CPUs. No kernel tuning or use flag optimization is necessary like we have to do on Gentoo, and Clear Linux is also a binary OS, so it obviously would have a much faster deployment time. It's also going to be much faster to update and much faster to install big packages. So you can download Clear Linux from clearlinux.org/downloads. It's available as a server OS, and it's also got Docker containers as well as a regular desktop OS. And there's also instructions down here for how to burn Clear Linux to a USB or even how to install it to a VM. I think I'll link this page in the description for you guys so that you can read it if you're interested. So I'm going to be installing it to a virtual machine. This didn't always work. There used to be problems with installing Clear Linux in VirtualBox. Even I had some issues with it, but it is working now. One thing to note is that I am using VirtualBox 6.1. I have a video on my channel that tells you how to install VirtualBox 6.1 because most Linux distros inside of the regular package manager, it's still serving up an older version. So follow that to install this version of VirtualBox if you want to follow along with Clear Linux in VirtualBox as well. So we want to just name it Clear Linux, and it should automatically change the type to Linux, this just generic one, 64-bit. You want to make sure that it's the same one. And for memory, we're going to crank that up to 4 gigs and create a virtual hard disk. And then we're going to crank that up to 30 gigs. We'll do a fixed size, so that's a little bit faster. And then we'll create it. Come in here, and we'll do 2 processors, so it can be a dual core. Let's do actually the hard disk first, so we can just reboot right into it. Crank up the video memory to 128 megs, VBox VGA, so we can have full screen. And then finally add the ISO. All right, and then we're going to start it up. And it just gives you this basically end curses screen to start up Clear Linux. All right, and then this is what the startup screen looks like. Then we just click this icon over here of the little like polygon penguin to start the Clear Linux installation. Select my language as American English. And one thing right off the bat is that the setup screen, like you'll see the steps to install it is really weird. So like it doesn't just go next when you select an option. Like if I select my keyboard US here and then hit confirm, it doesn't just automatically go to the next option. You have to then click it again, which for some reason I find that really annoying, that it doesn't just do next inside of the installation screen. It's making you do extra steps. So anyway, you want to do destructive installation to erase all the data and media. If you're going to be doing this to hardware, obviously you might have to do something different. You might have to do some sort of partitioning down here if you're on hardware. You also have the option to enable encryption, but I'm not going to do that inside of a virtual machine. And then manage the user. God, it's just so annoying having to click over and over again. So for the password, has to be 8 characters. That's I don't know. Another thing that's kind of annoying. I mean, I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to make you be more secure, but I don't really like forcing users to have more security in this way, especially if they're not used to using an 8-character password. If you're used to maybe using a PIN like 4 characters and you come up with an 8-character, you're probably just going to repeat your PIN twice, which really isn't that secure. So just another kind of small thing that I don't really agree with. And then telemetry. So by default, they want to collect some data, send it to Intel about how your system's functioning so that Intel can basically do optimizations. If you find that to be spooky, you can hit no, and then it's not going to collect the data. Actually, let me rephrase that. It will still collect the data. There is a way to disable the process once you're done installing. It just won't send your data off to Intel for them to potentially do spooky stuff with it. So we got the disabled now. So then we'll click install. And then it basically just goes ahead and does its thing. Now, one thing to note is that Clear Linux does not use grub. It uses systemd boot, which doesn't really matter for those of us that are on a VM, or even those of us who are just installing this to hardware in a single boot scenario, so you're not going to be booting any other Linux distros or Windows or whatever. But if you want to multi-boot multiple Linux OSs or Linux, Clear Linux with Windows, it can be kind of a pain to get Clear Linux to show up in your grub menu, which is probably what you're going to want if you're using another Linux OS that has grub. You basically have to chain boot to systemd boot from grub. So there's guides on Google for how to do that. Definitely look into doing that if you're going to try multi-booting Clear Linux with another Linux OS. Because yeah, it could be kind of a pain. It's similar to if you've ever tried to dual boot Linux with Windows 10, how, again, just very often, Windows 10 doesn't like to cooperate with grub, so it can be a little bit tricky to get that set up. So it's doing my installation. It's in progress now. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video so that we don't just have a few minutes of dead space watching the install go. All right, so my installation has been successful. I'm going to exit and then come up here to restart. Didn't take too long, took maybe about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, so you see how we didn't get a grub screen there. That's systemd boot for you. It kind of just goes right into your login screen. So obviously you don't want to boot from that as your primary bootloader. You want to add that to grub. And like I said, there's guides online for how to do that. All right, so now we are in Clear Linux. We can go ahead and show our application. They've actually got a pretty decent set of applications right out of the gate. I mean, they have GIMP, which is, of course, my favorite image editor. They've got HTOP as the resource manager. I really appreciate that. Of course, HTOP is my favorite resource manager. We've got Firefox for our web browser. And it's just got to load up. There we go. And they also have the latest version of Firefox, which I really appreciate because Linux distributions, they don't always include the newest version of software. And let's see, what do we have in programming? Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, it's got, you know, pretty decent set of applications, although we could do without this. So yeah, I like that it's got HTOP. Now, it does have a very different package manager than any other Linux distribution that I've come across so far. I guess it's more similar to Fedora's, which I used ages ago. So Basically, Clear Linux, we use SWUPD, so I guess swapd is how you would say that. But basically, when you update a package on Clear Linux, it's only pulling in the differences to the package instead of reinstalling everything. So as a result, we can do a full system update much faster. Also, one interesting thing about swapd is that by default, it does automatic updates. Now, you can turn this off. Some people might not like automatic updates because of how Windows handles them, but with most Linux updates, you don't actually have to restart your PC, and the updates generally aren't that invasive, so it probably won't be much of a problem for me. One major downside, though, with Clear Linux, as is the case with all very obscure Linux distributions, is that there aren't very many packages available in its repository. There's actually a page on the Clear Linux website that lists all of the packages, and it's not a very long web page at all. It's missing some core applications like Chromium, Steam, and VirtualBox. Git is available, so you could compile packages from there or other sources, but at that point, I think I'd rather just use Gentoo, to be honest with you, because the thing with Gentoo is, yeah, you have to compile the core utils and the kernel locally, which makes the installation take a lot longer, but it's not that big of a difference when it comes to the base install from my perspective. I mean, I remember the days of installing Windows from a DVD to a 5400 RPM hard disk, so just slow transfer speeds all around, and it would take about 90 minutes to 2 hours, which is roughly the same time it takes for my deploy Gentoo script to do a basic Gentoo installation. So I don't know, it's not that big a deal to me. But overall, I think I would give Clear Linux a 3 out of 10. I mean, it's very minimal. As you can see, it's using less than a gig of system resources at idle. But I don't think it's really suitable as a desktop OS right now. I mean, maybe if the packages that you need to build manually are going to be really few in number and they're not ones that are going to take very long to compile. But if you're going to compile VirtualBox and Steam and Chromium and things like that from source, like I said, you might as well just use Gentoo at that point or Slackware. I do really like the optimizations to the kernel, though. I think that other binary OSs, other binary Linux distributions should start adopting those optimizations as well. It would be great if Arch, for example, could port those all over, or even Manjaro, since Arch and Manjaro both have tons of packages available in them. It would also be interesting to see if I could port these optimizations over into a kernel on Gentoo, since I'm already using an Intel CPU. I'll have to install this new SSD that I got and try them out on hardware to see what type of results I can get. Anyway, that's it for this video, guys. Leave a like, subscribe, and share it all over.